The eviction notice was final. Mr. Martinez had 72 hours to cover his marine tattoos or face immediate removal from Sunset Gardens. But just as the HOA president moved to file the formal complaint, she had no idea she was threatening a man who'd spent 6 years specializing in the exact laws she was about to break. And what he revealed in that oncology treatment room froze her smug expression completely. Before we show you exactly how this cancer patient dismantled an entire HOA with 3 sentences, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because this legal takedown you won't forget. In the sterile brightness of room 204, fluorescent lights hummed overhead while the steady drip of chemotherapy medication marked time like a metronome. Victoria Chen stood framed in the doorway, her perfectly pressed blazer and leather-bound clipboard held like weapons of bureaucratic warfare. Her smile had the sharp edges of someone who'd never lost a fight against people too sick to fight back. The IV line snaked from Martinez's arm to the metal pole beside his chair, delivering poison designed to save his life, while she delivered what she thought was a knockout punch to end his peaceful retirement. Around them, the antiseptic smell of the cancer ward mixed with the weight of her authority, the kind that crushed people when they were already down. "Mr. Martinez," she announced with the satisfaction of a judge reading a death sentence, "you will cover those inappropriate tattoos or face immediate fines and potential eviction from Sunset Gardens." What Victoria Chen didn't know was that she'd just picked a fight with the wrong Marine, and what happened next would turn her little power trip into a legal nightmare she'd never forget. "My name is Jake Martinez, and I inherited my grandmother's house in Sunset Gardens. 3 months ago, right around the time my oncologist told me I'd be fighting the same leukemia that took my 8-year-old daughter Sophia 2 years earlier. What Chen didn't know was that my military background wasn't just about following orders. It was about ensuring everyone else followed the law. The HOA board has voted unanimously," Chen continued, her voice rising as nurses glanced nervously through the glass partition. "Your displays are inappropriate for a family community. We have standards." Those displays were butterfly tattoos covering my shoulders and back, each one representing a stage of Sophia's battle, each wing a memory of her laughter echoing across the community pool where I taught her to swim. The same pool where I now did my physical therapy, doctor's orders, because the warm water helped manage the joint pain from chemo. Chen wanted me to cover Sophia's memory with long sleeves in 90-degree heat, turning my medical necessity into a daily reminder that my daughter was somehow shameful. "You've got 72 hours, she said, sliding a violation notice onto my IV stand. "After that, it's $200 per day until compliance. Foreclosure proceedings begin in 30 days if violations remain unresolved." The nurse, Sarah, squeezed my shoulder as Chen's heels clicked away down the hallway. "That woman has been targeting people all over the neighborhood," she whispered. "My neighbor's getting fined for his wheelchair ramp being visually disruptive." That's when my compliance training kicked in fully. Pattern recognition, selective enforcement, discriminatory targeting of protected classes, veterans, disabled individuals, families dealing with medical conditions. Chen wasn't just power-hungry, she was systematically violating federal fair housing laws, and she was doing it with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real opposition. I looked at the violation notice again, noting the pre-printed format, the checkbox systems, the carefully worded language that skirted legal boundaries while crossing ethical ones. This wasn't Chen's first rodeo, but as I sat there with poison dripping into my veins to save my life, watching her walk away from the sacred memory of my daughter, I realized she'd just declared war on the wrong Marine. The butterfly on my left shoulder seemed to flutter as I flexed my hand around the IV line. Sophia used to trace those wings with her tiny fingers during her own chemo sessions, telling me stories about how butterflies carried messages between Earth and heaven. Chen thought she was dealing with a grieving cancer patient who'd roll over and comply. She had no idea she'd just handed a federal compliance expert a textbook case of civil rights violations wrapped in HOA letterhead. Where are you watching from? Because what happens next is going to show Chen that some fights aren't about property values or community standards. They're about protecting the people who can't protect themselves. And she just picked a fight with someone who made a career out of making sure bullies like her follow the law. The next morning, I walked out of my grandmother's house with a notebook and my phone, ready to document what I suspected was much bigger than one HOA president's personal vendetta. The chemo fatigue made each step deliberate, but my compliance officer instincts were razor sharp. 3 houses down, I found Manuel Ramirez power washing his driveway while his wife Maria sat on their porch, her prosthetic leg propped on a cushion. A bright yellow violation notice fluttered from their mailbox like a surrender flag. "Jake, right? Heard Chen's been giving you hell too," Manuel called out, shutting off the washer. 22 years in the army, lost my leg in Afghanistan, and now she's tell. Lingus, our wheelchair ramp, is aesthetically disruptive to neighborhood harmony. I pulled out my notebook documenting the violation code, the date, Manuel's protected status as a disabled veteran. "What's the fine structure?" $150 a day until we remove it. My wife needs that ramp to get to her car. Maria waved from the porch, her smile not hiding the worry in her eyes. Where's she supposed to go? Through the garage every time? 2 blocks over, I found Mrs. Patterson watering her roses with shaking hands. At 78, she'd lived in Sunset Gardens longer than Chen had been alive. Another yellow notice decorated her front door. "They want me to remove my oxygen concentrator from the porch," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Say it's medical equipment visible from the street and violates aesthetic guidelines. But Jake, if I keep it inside during the day, I can't sit out here anymore. This garden is all I have left of Harold." I added her case to my growing list. Elderly, medical equipment, selective targeting. The pattern was becoming crystal clear, but I needed to see the other side of Chen's enforcement. Walking past Chen's own street, I stopped and stared. Her corner lot showcased a massive hot tub installation that definitely hadn't existed 3 months ago. No permits visible, no setback compliance, and definitely no aesthetic oversight. 2 houses down, her brother-in-law's property featured a workshop that extended well past the building line into what should have been restricted easement space. The community pool area told the real story. Where families used to gather every afternoon, only 2 children played in the shallow end while their mothers sat rigid in deck chairs, eyes constantly scanning for Chen's approach. The Ramirez family's usual spot sat empty. Maria couldn't navigate the pool deck without her ramp access. "It's like walking on eggshells," whispered Janet Morrison, a mother of 2 whose husband deployed overseas 6 months ago. "Chen told me my kids were too loud during designated family hours, gave me a warning about excessive noise violations that could affect military housing assistance." Another protected class, another discriminatory target. I sat on a poolside chair where Sophia used to stack her colorful diving rings, watching the fear ripple through what should have been a joyful community space. These weren't random HOA power trips. This was systematic targeting of people who couldn't fight back. Disabled veterans, elderly residents, military families, medical patients. My phone buzzed with a text from my oncologist confirming my next treatment. As I looked around the nearly empty pool deck, I realized Chen had turned my daughter's sanctuary into a weapon of intimidation against the most vulnerable residents of Sunset Gardens. That evening, I organized my documentation like a military brief. 12 confirmed cases of discriminatory enforcement against protected classes, 0 violations issued to Chen's family or inner circle despite obvious code violations, pattern established, evidence documented, federal civil rights violations clearly indicated. Sophia's butterfly tattoos weren't just memorial ink, they were about transformation. And Chen had just given me everything I needed to transform this one-sided fight into a federal civil rights case that would expose her systematic abuse of power. She thought she was cleaning up the neighborhood. What she'd actually done was hand a compliance expert a textbook case of fair housing violations with enough evidence to bring federal investigators right to her perfectly manicured doorstep. The next morning, I was reviewing my discrimination documentation over coffee at Bean's grounds when Tommy Reeves slid into the boot across from me. His hands trembled as he wrapped them around his coffee mug, and the Vietnam veteran pin on his jacket caught the morning light. "Jake, we need to talk." His voice carried the weight of sleepless nights. "I've been watching what's happening to you, to Manuel, to Mrs. Patterson. I can't stay quiet anymore." I closed my notebook, studying the conflict written across his weathered face. Tommy served as HOA treasurer, Chen's right-hand man on the board. But the way his jaw clenched and his eyes darted toward the window suggested this wasn't an official visit. "Victoria, she's got it out for military families specifically." The words came out like a confession, his shoulders sagging with relief and guilt simultaneously. Her father came back from Vietnam broken, spent her whole childhood watching him drink himself to death while wearing his uniform around the house. She blames the military for destroying her family. My pen stopped moving across the page. This wasn't just power-hungry HOA overreach. This was personal vendetta wrapped in community governance. Tommy, you're telling me Chen is systematically targeting veterans because of her father's trauma? He nodded, his coffee growing cold as his hands continued their nervous dance around the mug. She calls it cleaning up the neighborhood character, but in private board meetings, she talks about removing military influences and protecting families from that lifestyle. When your name came up for the pool violations, she said. He paused, swallowing hard. She said military tattoos were glorifying violence in a family environment. The discriminatory intent just became documented fact through a board member's testimony. My compliance training kicked into overdrive. This was smoking gun evidence for federal civil rights investigators. Why are you telling me this? I asked, watching him struggle. All with loyalty and conscience. Because I served too, 68 to 70 infantry. His voice dropped to a whisper. When I came home, people spit on my uniform at the airport. I swore I'd never let anyone treat a veteran like that again. But I've been sitting in those board meetings, watching Victoria target people like us, and I've been a coward. Tommy's internal war played out in real time, the way he kept looking toward the door like Chen might walk in, how his foot tapped nervously under the table, the guilt etched in every line around his eyes. She's escalating things with you, Jake. Emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. She's pushing for immediate foreclosure proceedings, bypassing the normal 30-day grace period. Claims you're creating ongoing public disturbance by refusing compliance. This was the insider information I needed. Chen was accelerating her timeline, which meant she felt pressure. Good. Rushed decisions led to more mistakes, more evidence. There's something else. Tommy leaned forward, his voice barely audible. She's been documenting everything with her phone when she visits properties. Not just violations, she records people's reactions, their medical equipment, their children playing. I think she's building some kind of case file to justify mass removals. The pattern was becoming a strategy. Chen wasn't just targeting random military families, she was systematically documenting evidence to support wholesale community changes. This was organized discrimination with federal implications. Tommy, I need you to understand something. What you're describing isn't just HOA power trips, it's federal civil rights violations. If I'm going to stop this, I need documentation of those board meetings, those private conversations. He stared into his coffee, the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. If she finds out I'm talking to you, then we make sure. She doesn't find out until it's too late. I slid my card across the table. You served your country, Tommy. Now you get to serve your neighbors. As he pocketed my contact information, Tommy's hands finally stopped shaking. The decision was made. He'd chosen veteran brotherhood over board loyalty. Chen's systematic targeting just gained its most dangerous enemy, an insider with a conscience and access to her private strategies. That afternoon, Chen's escalation began with surgical precision. A certified letter arrived containing daily fine schedules, $200 per day, retroactive to my first pool appearance, totaling $1,800 already owed. The emergency board meeting notice followed an hour later, scheduled for the next evening with my case as the sole agenda item. By evening, she was canvassing the neighborhood with clipboards and righteous indignation. Mr. Martinez's inappropriate displays are affecting our property values, I heard her tell the Hendersons through my open window. We need community support to maintain our family-friendly standards. The next morning brought Chen herself to my front porch, armed with foreclosure paperwork and the confidence of someone who'd never met real resistance. I was barely 2 hours out of my latest chemo session, still fighting the nausea and bone-deep exhaustion that came with poison designed to save my life. Victoria, it's 7 a.m. I stood in my doorway, gripping the frame for support while she arranged her legal arsenal on my porch table like a war council. Mr. Martinez, the board voted unanimously last night to expedite your case due to ongoing community disruption. She slid the foreclosure notice across the table. You have 72 hours to achieve full compliance or face immediate legal action for property seizure. The morning sun caught Sophia's butterfly wind chime hanging beside my door, a gift from her last birthday that I'd hung where she could see it from her bedroom window during her final weeks. Chen's gaze landed on it with visible disgust. That's another violation, by the way, decorative items exceeding size restrictions for front-facing displays. Something cold settled in my chest. She wasn't just targeting my tattoos anymore. She was going after every trace of Sophia's presence in my life. The wind chime, the butterfly garden markers, the pool floats still stored in my garage from when she was learning to dive. You're making a mistake, Victoria. The only mistake was allowing military personnel to establish residence here without proper community integration requirements. Her voice carried that familiar edge of personal hatred Tommy had warned me about. This neighborhood was peaceful before your kind moved in. My kind. Military families, veterans, people who'd served their country and earned the right to live in peace. But Chen saw us as invaders threatening her perfect suburban kingdom. The foreclosure proceedings begin Monday. The bank's already been notified about your non-compliance status affecting property insurability. She gathered her papers with smug satisfaction. Maybe next time you'll choose a community more suited to your lifestyle choices. As her car pulled away, I sank into my porch chair, feeling the weight of targeted harassment settling over me like a blanket. The chemo fatigue made everything harder, but Chen's systematic escalation was making one thing crystal clear. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was about federal civil rights violations dressed up as community standards. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. The Ramirez family received foreclosure warnings. Mrs. Patterson got notices about her oxygen equipment. Janet Morrison faced fines for her children's excessive noise during military family housing assistance reviews. Chen wasn't just targeting me. She was using my case as a template for wholesale removal of military families and medical patients for Sunset Gardens. I looked up at Sophia's wind chime, its gentle music carrying memories of her laughter across the morning air. Chen thought she was dealing with a grieving cancer patient who'd crumble under legal pressure and community shame. What she didn't realize was that every escalation, every threat, every discriminatory action was building my federal case with military precision. Her personal vendetta was about to collide with constitutional law, and I had 6 years of compliance experience telling me exactly how that collision would end. By Thursday morning, I knew I needed legal backup that understood federal protections better than local HOA law. The Disability Rights Clinic downtown had helped Manuel Ramirez with his ramp issues, so I made an appointment with their lead attorney, hoping she could clarify my options under ADA accommodation requirements. Dr. Elena Martinez's office occupied the 3rd floor of an old federal building, her walls lined with civil rights, case law, and fair housing regulations that immediately caught my compliance-trained eye. She reviewed my documentation while I explained Chen's systematic targeting of protected classes. Jake, what you're describing goes far beyond HOA disputes or even ADA violations. She pulled a thick manual from her shelf, HUD Fair Housing Guidelines. This is systematic discrimination against protected classes under federal housing law. The fact that she's targeting veterans, disabled individuals, and medical patients specifically makes this a civil rights case. My military training kicked in as she explained the legal framework. You mean this falls under federal jurisdiction? Absolutely. Housing discrimination based on disability, military status, and medical conditions violates the Fair Housing Act. When HOA officials selectively enforce rules to target protected classes, they're acting as housing arbiters under federal law. She opened the manual to a section I recognized from my compliance training. HUD has enforcement authority and they take these cases very seriously. The pieces clicked together like a tactical briefing. Chen's personal vendetta had crossed into federal territory the moment she started targeting military families and medical patients. My compliance background suddenly became a strategic weapon instead of bureaucratic experience. The discrimination you're documenting, the patterns, the selective enforcement, the targeting of specific groups, that's exactly what federal investigators look for in civil rights cases. Dr. Martinez handed me complaint forms and contact information. Your military compliance background actually gives you a significant advantage here. You know how to document evidence properly and understand regulatory frameworks. I studied the federal complaint process, recognizing the systematic approach from my service days. What's the timeline for federal investigation? HUD typically begins preliminary review within 30 days. If they find probable cause, they can issue immediate cease and desist orders while conducting full investigations. They also have authority to impose financial penalties and mandate policy changes. The strategy was crystallizing. Instead of fighting Chen's HOA authority on her terms, I could invoke federal oversight that superseded local governance entirely. Her accelerated timeline would work against her. Rushed discrimination created more evidence, more witnesses, more federal violations. There's something else, Dr. Martinez continued, pulling case precedents from her files. When HOA officials engage in systematic discrimination, they can face personal liability under federal law. This isn't just about property rules anymore, it's about constitutional violations that carry criminal penalties. I left her office with federal complaint forms, HUD contact information, and a completely reframed understanding of my situation. Chen thought she was wielding HOA authority to remove unwanted residents. What she'd actually done was commit federal crimes while creating a paper trail for civil rights investigators. Walking back to my car, I realized my defensive mindset had completely shifted. Tommy's insider information confirmed discriminatory intent. My community documentation established systematic targeting. Dr. Martinez's legal guidance provided the federal framework to prosecute constitutional violations. Chen had escalated beyond local HOA authority into federal civil rights territory. My compliance training told me that when local officials exceeded their jurisdiction while violating federal law, they faced consequences far beyond their understanding. The butterfly tattoos covering my shoulders suddenly felt less like vulnerable targets and more like battle flags. Sophia's memory wasn't just worth protecting, it was worth fighting for with every tool federal law provided. Chen wanted a war over community standards. What she was about to get was a federal civil rights case that would expose her systematic discrimination to investigators who specialized in exactly this type of constitutional violation. My phone buzzed with another threatening text from the HOA. I deleted it without reading and dialed HUD's civil rights hotline instead. Time to shift from defense to offense using weapons Chen never saw coming. Friday morning brought the eviction papers, delivered by a nervous process server who apologized twice before handing me the legal documents. Chen had moved faster than expected, filing formal proceedings while I was still gathering federal evidence. The courthouse steps felt cold under my feet as I read through her claims. Ongoing community disruption, failure to maintain neighborhood standards, threats to property values and family safety. Walking back to my car, I called Dr. Kim's office for my weekly check-in, expecting route. I'm scheduling adjustments. Instead, her nurse delivered news that changed everything. Jake, Dr. Kim wants to extend your pool therapy requirements through the end of your treatment cycle. The joint inflammation from your latest chemo round is more severe than expected, and warm water therapy is now medically necessary, not just recommended. I sat in the courthouse parking lot staring at Chen's eviction papers while processing the medical reality. The community pool wasn't just Sophia's memorial space anymore. It was my prescribed treatment facility. Chen's tattoo enforcement directly interfered with doctor-ordered medical care for a cancer patient. That afternoon, I transformed my kitchen table into a federal case headquarters. Dr. Martinez had given me the legal framework, Tommy provided insider evidence of discriminatory intent, and now I had medical documentation of Chen's interference with prescribed treatments. The courthouse records database revealed more than I expected when I researched the HOA's legal standing. Chen's recent rule changes, including the family-appropriate appearance standards, were implemented without proper member voting procedures required by state law. Her emergency board meetings bypassed notification requirements, and her selective enforcement violated due process protections even within HOA governance. My compliance training recognized the pattern immediately. Chen had been so focused on targeting specific residents that she'd ignored basic legal procedures governing her own authority. Her rush to remove military families had created procedural violations that invalidated her enforcement actions entirely, but the federal framework offered more powerful remedies than technicalities about HOA procedures. Chen's systematic targeting of protected classes, combined with interference in medical treatments, created a civil rights case that would bring federal investigators directly to Sunset Gardens. I opened the HUD complaint. Forms Dr. Martinez had provided, organizing my evidence with military precision. 12 documented cases of discriminatory enforcement against veterans, disabled residents, and medical patients. Tommy's testimony about Chen's stated intent to target military families, medical documentation showing Chen's actions interfered with prescribed cancer treatments. The personal stakes crystallized as I worked through the federal framework. This wasn't just about protecting Sophia's memory anymore, it was about ensuring other military families and medical patients wouldn't face Chen's systematic harassment. The Ramirez family's wheelchair ramp, Mrs. Patterson's oxygen equipment, Janet Morrison's children facing noise violations during military housing reviews. As evening approached, I made my decision. Chen's eviction timeline gave me 72 hours to comply with her discriminatory demands or face property seizure. Federal law gave me tools to stop her systematic civil rights violations entirely. I dialed HUD's civil rights complaint line, providing case numbers and documentation while formally initiating federal investigation into Chen's discriminatory practices. The State Attorney General's Civil Rights Division received the same evidence package, along with documentation of Chen's procedural violations and interference with medical treatments. By sunset, I had filed comprehensive federal complaints that would bring constitutional scrutiny to Chen's HOA authority while establishing legal precedent, protecting military families and medical patients in similar situations. Standing on my porch, listening to Sophia's wind chime carry memories across the evening air, I realized Chen's escalation had given me everything needed to transform a local HOA dispute into federal civil rights enforcement. He stared at his workbench, decades of military service medals hanging on the wall behind him. "Because I heard her on the phone yesterday laughing about your chemo treatments. Said watching you get sicker while fighting the violations was poetic justice for military arrogance." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of neighborhood life continuing outside Tommy's garage. Chen hadn't just crossed legal lines, she'd revealed the depth of her personal hatred for everything I represented. "Jake, I've been complicit in this. I sat in those meetings, signed those violation notices, helped her target people like us." Tommy's voice broke slightly. "I can't live with that anymore." I finished photographing the evidence, understanding that Tommy had just handed me federal prosecutor's dream case. Documented intent, systematic discrimination, official correspondence proving civil rights violations, witness testimony from a board insider. "This ends her, Tommy. Federal investigators dream about evidence this clear." "Good," he said, closing the empty envelope. "Some fights are worth losing friends over. This is one of them." Sunday morning, I cleared everything off my grandmother's dining room table and transformed it into a federal case war room. Tommy's evidence joined my growing documentation, 12 manila folders organized by violation type, protected class status, and federal statute violations. My military compliance training kicked into high gear as I approached this like any other regulatory investigation. The HUD Fair Housing Act guidelines sprawled across one wall, marked with sticky notes highlighting relevant sections. Section 804 for discriminatory practices, Section 818 for enforcement procedures, Section 901 for civil penalties. Each of Chen's actions mapped directly to specific federal violations with documented precedents and penalty structures. My LA. P-Top displayed multiple browser windows, federal case databases, civil rights precedents, HUD enforcement timelines. I cross-referenced Chen's systematic targeting against established patterns from successful federal prosecutions. Her methodology matched textbook examples of housing discrimination that resulted in criminal charges and substantial financial penalties. The evidence organization followed military briefing protocols, primary documents in chronological order, witness statements categorized by protected class status, supporting documentation indexed by federal statute reference. Chen's emails from Tommy provided smoking gun intent, while my community canvas established systematic patterns affecting multiple families. Federal database searches revealed additional ammunition. Chen's previous employment as a corporate attorney included 3 discrimination settlements that were sealed but referenced in professional conduct reviews. Her pattern of targeting protected classes extended beyond Sunset Gardens into her professional history. I drafted the HUD complaint using regulatory language from my compliance training. Respondent Victoria Chen, acting as HOA president of Sunset Gardens Community Association, engaged in systematic discriminatory enforcement of community rules targeting protected classes including disabled veterans, medical patients, and military families, in direct violation of Fair Housing Act sections 804A, 804B, and 804C. The complaint detailed each instance of discriminatory enforcement with supporting documentation, witness statements, and medical records, proving interference with prescribed treatments. Tommy's insider evidence provided documented intent, while my military experience ensured proper regulatory formatting and legal terminology. State civil rights databases offered additional enforcement mechanisms. California's Unruh Civiles Rights Act provided parallel protections with faster enforcement timelines. The State Attorney General's Civil Rights Division maintained dedicated housing discrimination units with authority to pursue criminal charges alongside federal investigations. By evening, I had constructed a comprehensive federal case that approached Chen's discrimination from multiple legal angles. Fair Housing Act violations for systematic targeting, ADA violations for interfering with medical accommodations, constitutional violations for due process failures, state civil rights violations for discriminatory enforcement patterns. The documentation package included victim impact statements, medical records proving interference with treatments, financial documentation of discriminatory fines, and Tommy's insider evidence of explicit discriminatory intent. Each piece of evidence referenced specific federal statutes with established precedents and penalty frameworks. My laptop screen displayed the federal complaint portal ready for submission. 47 pages of evidence, 12 witness statements, documented patterns of systematic discrimination affecting 8 families, all supported by insider testimony and official HOA correspondence proving intentional targeting of protected classes. Chen's eviction timeline gave me 18 hours before her next escalation. Federal investigators typically began preliminary review within 72 hours of complaint filing, with authority to issue immediate cease and desist orders for ongoing discrimination. The butterfly wind chime outside my window caught the evening breeze, Sophia's memory whispering encouragement through the gentle music. This wasn't just about protecting our family legacy anymore. It was about establishing federal precedent that would protect military families and medical patients from HOA discrimination nationwide. My compliance training told me that systematic discrimination, with documented intent and multiple protected class victims, created prosecutors' dream cases. Chen's personal vendetta had evolved into federal civil rights violations with criminal implications and substantial financial penalties. Tomorrow, I would activate federal machinery designed specifically to prosecute housing discrimination. Chen thought she was dealing with a grieving cancer patient fighting HOA rules. She had no idea she'd handed a federal compliance expert textbook evidence of constitutional violations. Monday morning, I arrived at the Sunset Gardens Community Center 30 minutes before my scheduled meeting with affected families. The main meeting room felt different now. Instead of hosting birthday parties and book clubs, it was becoming headquarters for a federal civil rights case that would expose Chen's systematic discrimination. Manuel and Maria Ramirez arrived first, followed by Mrs. Patterson with her portable oxygen concentrator. Janet Morrison brought documentation of her military housing assistance complications. By 9 a.m., 8 families filled the room, every one of Chen's systematically targeted victims, ready to coordinate their fight against discriminatory enforcement. What Jake's uncovered isn't just individual harassment, I explained, spreading Tommy's evidence across the conference table. This is organized discrimination against protected classes, documented in official HOA communications with explicit intent to remove military families and medical patients from our community. The room fell silent as families read Chen's emails describing them as military trash, medical liabilities, and neighborhood deterioration factors. Maria Ramirez's hand shook as she read Chen's notes about targeting their wheelchair ramp as a safety hazard that could justify removal. "She wrote this down?" Mrs. Patterson's voice carried decades of dignity challenged by targeted harassment. "She actually planned to remove us because we're sick or disabled." I pulled out witness statement forms prepared according to federal guidelines. Each of your experiences represents specific federal violations. Manuel's wheelchair ramp interference violates ADA protections. Mrs. Patterson's medical equipment targeting violates fair housing medical accommodation requirements. Janet's military family harassment violates veteran protection statutes. The coalition building process followed community organizing principles from my military training. Each family documented their specific experiences, while I cross-referenced violations against federal statute requirements. The systematic nature of Chen's targeting became undeniable when viewed collectively. "What happens next?" asked David Chen, no relation to Victoria, whose family faced violations for culturally inappropriate landscaping that turned out to be targeting their Asian heritage garden elements. "Federal complaints to HUD, State Civil Rights Division, and the Attorney General's Office. Your witness statements become evidence in criminal civil rights investigations. I distributed federal complaint reference numbers and contact information for investigative agencies. Chen's documented discrimination against 8 protected class families creates prosecutable patterns under federal law." Maria Ramirez leaned forward, her military spouse experience evident in her tactical questions. "What about retaliation? She'll escalate when she finds out we're coordinating." "Federal law prohibits retaliation against civil rights complainants. Any escalation becomes additional evidence of discriminatory intent." I referenced Tommy's insider position and federal protection protocols. "We have inside documentation of her strategies and federal investigators monitoring for retaliation attempts." The community canvassing revealed additional discrimination patterns I hadn't discovered initially. The Patel family faced architectural violations, targeting their cultural modifications. Elderly Mr. Johnson received noise complaints about his medical alert system. Young mother Sarah Williams got fined for children's toys that detracted from community aesthetics. Each new case strengthened the federal complaint by demonstrating systematic discrimination affecting multiple protected classes throughout Sunset Gardens. Chen's targeting wasn't random harassment, it was organized removal of anyone who didn't fit her vision of acceptable community residence. By noon, I had collected 12 witness statements documenting systematic discrimination affecting veterans, disabled individuals, medical patients, ethnic minorities, and families with children. The federal case expanded beyond individual violations into community-wide civil rights abuse with documented intent and systematic implementation. Drop a like if you've ever felt the power of community organizing against injustice, and subscribe to see how federal investigators respond to this level of documented discrimination. Walking back to my car, I realized Chen's systematic approach had created her own downfall. Her documented planning, explicit discriminatory language, and coordinated targeting of multiple protected classes provided federal prosecutors with exactly the evidence needed for criminal civil rights charges. The coalition meeting accomplished more than evidence gathering. It transformed individual victims into a unified community ready to support federal civil rights enforcement. Chen's divide-and-conquer strategy had backfired, creating organized opposition with legal standing and documented evidence of systematic constitutional violations. Tomorrow, federal agencies would receive comprehensive complaints supported by community coalition and insider testimony. Chen's personal vendetta was about to face constitutional scrutiny designed specifically to prosecute housing discrimination. Tuesday morning, I stood before the imposing federal building downtown, carrying 3 identical briefcases containing comprehensive civil rights complaints that would transform Chen's local HOA authority into federal criminal liability. The marble steps felt solid beneath my feet as I approached the machinery of constitutional enforcement. The HUD Regional Fair Housing Office occupied the building's 3rd floor, where civil rights specialist Jennifer Adams reviewed my 47-page complaint with the methodical attention of someone who'd prosecuted housing discrimination for 15 years. Tommy's insider evidence spread across her desk alongside witness statements from 12 protected class families. Mr. Martinez, this level of documented systematic discrimination with explicit intent is exactly what federal fair housing enforcement targets. She photographed Chen's emails with their smoking gun language about cleaning out military trash and targeting medical patients. We'll initiate preliminary investigation immediately with authority to issue cease and desist orders for ongoing violations. The State Attorney General's Civil Rights Division received identical documentation 1 floor down. Investigator Michael Torres, himself a disabled veteran, read Chen's discriminatory emails with visible anger. Personal bias against military families combined with systematic targeting creates prosecutable hate crime elements under state civil rights statutes. Federal prosecutors occupied the building's 7th floor, where Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Park specialized in housing discrimination cases. My compliance training had prepared documentation according to prosecutorial standards. Chronological evidence organization, witness statement authentication, federal statute cross-referencing with established precedents. The systematic nature of this discrimination, combined, with documented intent and multiple protected class victims, meets criminal prosecution thresholds under federal civil rights statutes, she explained, initiating case file procedures. We'll coordinate with HUD enforcement while developing criminal charges for conspiracy to violate civil rights. Each agency activated investigation protocols designed for exactly Chen's type of systematic discrimination. HUD's preliminary review process included immediate contact with Sunset Gardens HOA, demanding cessation of discriminatory practices pending investigation completion. State civil rights investigators would conduct interviews with affected families while documenting ongoing violations. The federal building's computer terminals allowed me to research Chen's background through official databases unavailable to civilian searches. Her previous employment history revealed 3 sealed discrimination settlements and professional conduct reviews mentioning bias against protected classes and inappropriate personal animus affecting professional judgment. Additional federal violations emerged through official records inquiry. Chen's HOA rule implementations bypassed state-mandated community notification requirements. Her fine structures exceeded statutory limits for community association enforcement. Her foreclosure procedures violated due process protections under both state and federal law. By afternoon, I had filed comprehensive complaints with 4 separate agencies, each approaching Chen's discrimination from different legal angles with overlapping jurisdiction and enforcement authority. The federal machinery designed to prosecute housing discrimination was now focused specifically on Sunset Gardens and Victoria Chen's systematic civil rights violations. Walking back to my car, I received confirmation texts from each investigative agency. HUD assigned case number 0924-0847 with preliminary review scheduled within 72 hours. State Civil Rights Division opened investigation SR 2024-3341 with immediate victim interview protocols. Federal prosecutors initiated case review US 24 CR 2891 for potential criminal charges. Chen's eviction deadline was Thursday morning, 36 hours away. Federal investigators would contact Sunset Gardens HOA Wednesday with cease and desist orders prohibiting discriminatory enforcement pending investigation completion. Her systematic targeting was about to collide with constitutional enforcement designed specifically for housing discrimination prosecution. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Emergency board meeting tonight. Chen's panicking about outside interference but doesn't know what's coming." The inside information confirmed Chen remained unaware of federal scrutiny while continuing discriminatory practices that would become additional evidence. Standing in the federal building's shadow, I realized my military compliance training had prepared me perfectly for this moment. Chen's personal vendetta had evolved into systematic civil rights violations with documented intent, multiple agency jurisdiction, and criminal prosecution potential. Tomorrow, federal investigators would arrive at Sunset Gardens armed with constitutional authority that superseded HOA governance entirely. Chen thought she was removing unwanted military families from her community. What she'd actually done was commit federal crimes while providing prosecutors with textbook evidence of housing discrimination. The butterfly tattoos on my shoulders felt like armor now, Sophia's memory protected by the full weight of federal civil rights enforcement and constitutional law designed to prevent exactly Chen's tie. P of systematic discrimination. Wednesday evening, the Sunset Gardens Community Center buzzed with nervous energy as residents filled every seat for Chen's emergency board meeting. She had promised final resolution of ongoing community disruptions. Her agenda focused entirely on my eviction proceedings. What she didn't know was that federal investigators were already in the building. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back row where I could observe the crowd's reaction to what was about to unfold. Manuel and Maria Ramirez sat with other affected families, their witness statements already in federal hands. Mrs. Patterson clutched her portable oxygen concentrator, no longer hiding the medical equipment Chen had targeted for violations. Chen called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. sharp, her confidence radiating as she addressed the packed room. "Tonight we'll finalize the removal of residents who refuse to maintain our community standards. The Martinez case represents everything we're protecting our families from." "Actually, Mrs. Chen, we need to interrupt these proceedings." The voice came from the center aisle, where HUD civil rights specialist Jennifer Adams walked forward with federal credentials and official documentation. Behind her, Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Park and State Civil Rights Investigator Michael Torres approached the board table with the authority of constitutional enforcement. The room fell silent as Adams displayed her federal identification. "I'm Jennifer Adams with HUD's Regional Fair Housing Office. We're here regarding case 0924-0847, systematic housing discrimination complaints filed against Sunset Gardens HOA and Victoria Chen personally." Chen's face went white as federal authority superseded her local HOA power. "This is a private community meeting. You have no jurisdiction here." "Ma'am, fair housing violations fall under federal jurisdiction regardless of local governance," Torres responded, his disabled veteran pin catching the overhead lights. "We have preliminary findings of systematic discrimination against protected classes, documented through official HOA communications." Adams opened her briefcase, revealing copies of Chen's emails that Tommy had provided as evidence. "These communications show explicit intent to target military families, medical patients, and disabled veterans for removal from your community." She began reading Chen's own words aloud, "cleaning out military trash from Sunset Gardens before property values tank." The room erupted in gasps and angry murmurs as residents heard their HOA president's documented hatred. "Military families bring violence culture, medical families create aesthetic problems," Adams continued reading from official HOA correspondence. "Target both groups through appearance violations and emotional pressure points." Maria Ramirez stood up, her voice carrying across the stunned room. She called us trash for my husband's military service and my prosthetic leg. Mrs. Patterson rose shakily, supported by her oxygen equipment. She wanted to remove my medical devices because they were visually disruptive. Tommy Reeves walked to the front of the room, his HOA treasurer position lending weight to his testimony. I provided federal investigators with internal communications showing Victoria's systematic targeting of protected classes. She explicitly stated her intent to remove military families and medical patients from our community. The room exploded in angry voices as residents realized their elected HOA president had been systematically discriminating against neighbors based on military service and medical conditions. Families who had supported Chen's community standards agenda now understood they had been enabling constitutional violations. Furthermore, Attorney Park announced, her federal authority commanding immediate silence, "We're issuing cease and Ds. Ist orders prohibiting any enforcement actions against complainant families pending completion of our civil rights investigation." Chen's eviction proceedings against me dissolved instantly under federal oversight. Her discriminatory fine structure faced constitutional scrutiny. Her systematic targeting of protected classes would now be prosecuted under criminal civil rights statutes. "Mrs. Chen, you'll receive official notification of federal charges within 72 hours, Torres stated, serving legal papers that transformed her HOA authority into criminal liability. Housing discrimination against protected classes carries substantial criminal penalties under federal law. As federal investigators gathered their evidence and prepared to leave, the community center buzzed with residents approaching affected families with apologies and support. Chen's divide-and-conquer strategy had backfired completely, unifying the community against systematic discrimination. I remained seated as neighbors approached with handshakes and promises of solidarity. Sophia's memory was finally safe, protected by federal civil rights enforcement and a community that now understood the difference between legitimate governance and discriminatory harassment. Chen's personal vendetta had just collided with constitutional law, and the Constitution won decisively. 3 weeks later, I stood at the edge of the Sunset Gardens community pool as the golden hour sun painted ripples across the water's surface. The butterfly tattoos covering my shoulders and back were fully visible for the first time since my cancer diagnosis, each wing a celebration of Sophia's memory, rather than a source of shame or violation notices. The federal investigation had moved with stunning efficiency. HUD's final report documented systematic discrimination affecting 14 families, with financial penalties totaling $847,000 against the HOA and personal criminal charges filed against Chen for conspiracy to violate civil rights under federal housing law. She resigned in disgrace the day after federal marshals served her arrest warrant. Tommy Reeves had been elected emergency HOA president by unanimous community vote, his first act repealing all discriminatory policies and establishing veteran and medical patient protection protocols. The new board included Manuel Ramirez, Mrs. Patterson, and 3 other previously targeted families who would ensure constitutional compliance going forward. "Mr. Jake, can you teach me that butterfly stroke you showed Emma?" 7-year-old Marcus Thompson paddled over eagerly, his mother Janet watching from poolside chairs where she no longer feared violation notices for military family activities. "Sure thing, buddy." Sophia loved this stroke because she said it looked like her tattoos were swimming with her. I demonstrated the arm movements while Marcus giggled at the comparison, his natural swimming ability reminding me of my daughter's fearless approach to deep water. The pool area buzzed with afternoon family activities that had returned after Chen's removal. Maria Ramirez coached her teenage daughter through diving techniques, while Manuel grilled hamburgers at the community barbecue station. Mrs. Patterson sat in the shade with her oxygen concentrator, reading stories to children who saw medical equipment as part of normal community life rather than aesthetic violations. Dr. Kim's latest treatment update had been encouraging. My cancer markers were responding well to therapy, and the warm water exercise program remained essential for joint mobility and mental health. The pool where Sophia learned to swim had become my healing sanctuary, protected now by federal precedent that would safeguard other military families and medical patients from HOA discrimination nationwide. "Jake, the Attorney General's office called today," Tommy announced, joining me at the pool's edge. "Your case is BT ing used as training material for federal civil rights prosecutors. They said your documentation and compliance expertise created the most comprehensive housing discrimination case they've prosecuted in 5 years." The legal precedent extended beyond Sunset Gardens. HUD had issued nationwide guidance citing our case as definitive proof that HOA discrimination against protected classes would face federal prosecution. Military families, medical patients, and disabled veterans across the country now had documented legal protection from systematic HOA harassment. As evening approached, I floated on my back in the warm water, Sophia's butterfly wind chime creating gentle music from my nearby porch. The tattoos that commemorated her battle with leukemia had become symbols of victory over discrimination, proof that systematic targeting of vulnerable families would face constitutional consequences. Chen's personal vendetta had transformed into community healing and federal civil rights protection. Her attempt to remove military families and medical patients had instead established legal precedent protecting exactly those populations from HOA abuse of power. "Daddy used to swim here with his little girl," I overheard Marcus tell his friend, pointing to the butterfly tattoos as I climbed out of the pool. "Now he teaches all of us to swim like butterflies, too." The community center announced next week's Memorial Garden dedication, where Sophia's butterfly garden would provide a peaceful space for families dealing with medical challenges. Chen's discrimination had inadvertently created community solidarity that honored memory through inclusion rather than exclusion. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Standing in the golden light with my butterfly tattoos gleaming and children's laughter echoing across the pool, I realized Chen's hatred had accomplished the opposite of her intentions. Instead of removing military families and medical patients, she had created a community that celebrated service, supported healing, and protected the most vulnerable residents through federal law. Sophia's memory lived on through every child who learned to swim in these waters, every family who found acceptance despite medical challenges, and every veteran who could finally call Sunset Gardens home without fear of discrimination.